Well, welcome to the book of Joel. Yes, this is a book in the Old Testament. You may be thinking, I've never heard of the book of Joel. I didn't know that was in the Old Testament. It is. So we're again part of that lesser prophets period, where some of them we don't hear a lot about. We don't get a quotes and references from them very often. Joel's one we do see references for in regards to latter day prophecy, but that's it, basically. So we have a couple challenges when understanding the book of Joel. One is we don't know who Joel really is. There's not a lot of data in here to talk about who he is, like his background, the history of him, where he lived or was born, or anything like that. And we don't have enough data in here to date where his writings come from very well. So, and if you have more information on Joel, feel free to share links to it in the comments. But as best as I've been able to find, that the challenge is Joel does not bring up Assyria or Babylon. So when we think of Old Testament prophecy, especially in this time period that we are in, we don't hear Assyria or Babylon mentioned. So maybe that means Joel predates Isaiah. Maybe he's before Isaiah. And that's where we could put Joel in to the chronological timeline of the Old Testament. Remember, the Old Testament is not in chronological order. It does have a chronological order to it, sort of, but it's not perfect. It's especially in these lesser prophets, it's jumbled basically, because they didn't put the major prophets and lesser prophets aren't necessarily in chronological order, but more of these are the books that were big, these are the books that were small, basically. So they're not chronologically lined up. So it could be there, but the thing about Joel is he does mention Greeks in some of his writings. And so that could mean maybe he was after the Babylonian conquest. Maybe this is maybe he's one of the oldest books chronologically in the Old Testament, basically. So this maybe he's more intermediary period, the 400-year gap in between the Old Testament and New Testament, maybe he comes from that time period. We don't know. Maybe the other possibility is some of these writings are from a pre-Isaiah time frame, and some of these writings are from a post-Old Testament, the intermediate period time frame, and maybe they got meshed together into one book. That is possible too. We don't know for sure. So, from a historical standpoint, we have a hard time placing where Joel is in the Old Testament. But that doesn't necessarily mean his message is any less important, basically, for us. So this is a good point to think of. Okay, the message, the truth of what he speaks, isn't dependent on proving historicity of it. Okay, so we think of this concept, we talked about this a lot at the beginning of the book of Isaiah, the idea of prophetic writings. A lot of scholars push this concept of prophetic writings out and say we have to find some historicity to it. We have to connect it somehow in the timeline, and it can't be written before the events talked about in the book have happened. It has to be written after those events happened, because it wouldn't make sense to write about events before they happened, unless you believe in the prophecy. And if you believe in prophecy and prophetic writings, Joel makes a lot more sense because it's all last days stuff. It doesn't really apply to the Old Testament times as much. So it's more last days stuff. And so we're going to see that. So you think about it from that latter day prophecy. So like our day and age and our future basically is what Joel's writing about. So when you think of our present time and our future, and that Joel's an Old Testament prophet writing about this, that it'll make a lot more sense, basically. So that's how that would be a good way to look at this book, basically. So let's jump in to chapter 1 and get started with the book of Joel. So in this chapter here, verse 1, in fact, the word of the Lord that came to Joel the son of Pethuel. Hear this, ye old men, give ear, all ye inhabitants of the land. Hath this been in your days, or even in the days of your fathers? So talking about basically, pay attention. Has something like this happened in the past, basically, or even in the present? Verse 3, tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. So pass these stories down of these experiences. Verse 4, that which the palmer worm hath left, that hath the locust eaten, and that which the locust hath left hath the cankerworm eaten, and that which the cankerworm hath left hath the caterpillar eaten. Now so there's two ways we can look at verse 4. It kind of sounds strange. It's talking about a worm that is eating something, and then another flying bug will come in and eat it, and then another worm eats it, flying bug eats it. So this could talk about, one way to look at this from a entomological standpoint, maybe in the study of bugs basically, is this could be talking about different stages of life for something like a locust. So it starts as a larvae, becomes a different, it evolves, just like a caterpillar turns into butterflies. Most flying insects start out as some kind of a caterpillar worm type idea, and then later gain wings and things like that and do more. So it shows multiple levels of this happening. So the palmer worm could be the pupae version of the locust, and then it becomes a locust later. So when the palmer worm eats and what's left, the locust will come in and eat it, basically. And whatever the locust has left, the next worm will come in and eat it. And then when the next worm is done, then the caterpillar is going to come in and eat it too. Now, if you think about this is lots of destruction. If you have this many bugs coming in, huge pestilences, lots and lots of destruction is happening. Some people will look at this idea of growth or these different stages and think about succeeding armies coming in. So again, this gets that idea of what could be possibly why we would see Joel as a pre-Isaiah time frame, is maybe this is mentioning Assyria's going to come in, then Babylon's going to come in, then Greeks will come in, then Rome will come in. If you think about the vision of Daniel, those different armies that'll come through, basically, you could kind of see that in verse 4 to an extent. Now verse 5, awake ye drunkards, and weep and howl all ye drinkers of wine, because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. So the people are in a stupor. They're drunk. They're in a state of inebriation. So if you think of they literally could be in that state as well, but we have to think of this too from a spiritual standpoint of they are spiritually drunk. They don't know how to tell the difference between what is false and what is true. They're struggling to understand reality in the spiritual world. And so they're blinded, they're lulled into this state where basically they're not paying attention to the truth. They're stuck in their thoughts. They can't spiritually progress, basically, because of the inebriation. So if you think about it, idolatry is dulling their spiritual senses. They're not having to pay attention to God. They're not having to spiritually be mature and build themselves up, because their idol worship kind of eliminates the need for all that from them, basically. So they're spiritually lazy. Verse 6, for a nation is come up upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he hath the cheek teeth of a great lion. And we can see in this one, there's a phrase in Revelations chapter 9 about lions coming in to devour the lambs, and there's some things that are happening. So a nation is coming up that is going to be really bad. Now we can see in this again potential future ideas of Assyria and Babylon coming in, but if we think about this from a latter day standpoint, this is getting ready for the second coming of Christ. These are planning these ideas of the destruction. So this could be leading up to the Battle of Armageddon that happens before Christ comes, basically. So we can think about it from that standpoint as well as we're reading along. Let's see, verse 7, he hath laid my vine waste and barked my fig tree. He hath made it clean bare and cast it away. The branches thereof are made white. So all the bark is stripped off the trees, which is bad because that takes a lot of the protection for the tree away. The tree is exposed. It'll have more problems with the amount of bugs and pestilence we just talked about a couple verses ago. It's going to get bad. So lots of destruction, lots of problems happening. Verse 8, lament like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the husband of her youth. So this would be like a young so when we hear virgin again, if you want to go back to our I don't remember exactly off the top of my head right now which chapter in Isaiah it is. It's one of the first couple. I think it's chapter 3 of Isaiah is what coming to mind. The discussion of virgin. So in the Greek translation, the word virgin uh, implies a woman who has not had sex, but the Hebrew version actually means also possibly a woman who basically is young, a young woman. So this could be a virgin or a young woman who sackcloth for the husband of her youth. So she got married in her early years, teenage years probably, and she's lost her husband. Probably because if we think of the idea of invading army, he's off in the war and got killed. She's wearing sackcloth basically to mourn his loss. So that's how we could look at verse 8. Now, verse 9, the meat offering and the drink offering is cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests, the Lord's ministers, mourn. So we could look at this and say, so that remember the meat offerings and drink offerings were different types of sacrifices according to the law of Moses that could be given at the tabernacle or the temple, basically. But the meat offering and drink offering is cut off. They can't do these offerings. So this could be a sign of lack of resources. They don't have the ability they don't have the things they need to perform these ordinances because there's a famine, there's droughts, there's other problems that are happening here. Now we could also look at this too, again, from a more spiritual standpoint and look at this and say, okay, wickedness and selfishness cause us to use things in wrong ways, so we disrupt the natural ways. Nature replenishes itself, but with wickedness, we change it to what we want and go against natural ways. We end up breaking the cycles and causing the destruction of the things around us. So in our modern world, we tend to see nature as opposite the modern world. Nature has a tendency to heal itself, to take care of itself. It has cycles and patterns and does things on its own. It can reclaim cities that you build a city, you bulldoze the nature out, build a city, but if you abandon the city, nature will come back and grow over it, take it over again. All the wood and other things will degrade down and break down, and trees will come back in, and plants and animals and vegetation. So this could be also the idea of pushing nature out and doing it the way we think it should be done, and it doesn't work out, and we end up causing imbalances in the system and problems. The fields won't get our harvests and other things like that because we've changed the ecology of what we're living in. Now, verse 10, the field is wasted, the land mourneth. For the corn is wasted, the new wine is dried up, the oil languisheth. So think about the idea of, again, possible famines, droughts, ecological disasters and things that are happening, as well as if war is happening, then this is a very severe lack of resources that are going to supply the war, which is going to make it hard to win if you don't have the supplies to do it. So either way we look at this, lots and lots of destruction, lots of problems and challenges that are happening. Verse 11, be ye ashamed, O ye husbandmen. Howl, O ye vine dressers, for the wheat and for the barley, because the harvest of the field is perished. So again, from a literal standpoint, droughts, famines, wars, all that we can easily see in this chapter of this is the results of these destructions. So natural destructions from droughts and famines and pestilences and plagues and things, but also war in there as well. Man-made disasters happening also. And it's kind of depressing place to be. Spiritually, this is like showing that wickedness is rampant and people are not being spiritual. They're not connecting with God. There's a lack of spiritual resources in the area. So we could see that as a kind of duality in this chapter. Let's see, verse 12. The vine is dried up, the fig tree languisheth, the pomegranate tree, the palm tree also, the apple tree, even all the trees of the field are withered, because joy is withered away from the sons of men. So just like a drought will wither up the trees and they can't live, so you don't get your fruit, the joy of the people has withered. This could come from, again, destructions. This could come from abuse, terrible situations that are happening where the poor get oppressed, the rich are wealthy, but then they are being broken into, and there's challenges and fights and conflicts and death and all kinds of destruction. It's just not a fun time to be alive, not a fun time to be around this, is the challenge. They've lost happiness. Verse 13, gird yourselves and lament, ye priests. Howl, so this is priests, religious leaders, howl ye ministers of the altar. Come, lie all night in sackcloth, ye ministers of my God, for the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. So this is trying to rally the religious leaders to say, it's time to realize we're in a bad spot. We need to get this to change. The spirituality of the people is terrible. Wickedness is rampant. Verse 14, sanctify ye a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord. So this is the time to supplicate God, time to pray, fast, do things to help us commune with God to get his help in this. So if we think of this from a pride cycle standpoint, that's that part of, hey, we're in the middle of all this destruction and we're kind of sick of it and we want God's help to get out of it. So we're hopefully starting to see the beginning of the transition out of the bad part of the pride cycle and into a better state, basically, where God is now helping the people to recover. Verse 15, alas for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. So the day of the Lord, second coming, this is all that destruction and wickedness and problems that they're going to be having just before Christ comes. It's going to be really bad situation. Verse 16, is not the meat cut off before our eyes, yea, joy and gladness from the house of our God? Joy and gladness are cut off. People are sad. People are in depressed states. People are dealing with lots of anxieties. People are struggling to find reason to live. They're having a hard time. Their life has become difficult. There are lots of challenges and problems going on. They are starving, spiritually and physically. There's a lot of challenges. Verse 17, the seed is rotten under their clods. So you think about clods of dirt, so you've got your seed in the soil. The seed has gone rotten. The garners are laid desolate. The barns are broken down, for the corn is withered. How do the beasts groan? The herds of cattle are perplexed, because they have no pasture. Yea, the flocks of sheep are made desolate. O Lord, to thee will I cry, for the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame hath burned all the trees of the field. The beasts of the field cry also unto thee, for the rivers of waters are dried up, and the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness. So great fires, could be intense heat combined with droughts, wildfires, burning things down. There's nowhere for the animals to go. We can send them out, but it's a burnt pasture. There's nothing for them to eat. It's gone, and the rivers are drying up. The drought conditions are getting bad. Could be from the amount of heat. So could this be predicting global warming to an extent in the last days? Maybe. Global warming, I think, is more human caused than nature, in the sense that the earth, in the book of Enoch, we read about the earth responding to the wickedness of the people. So the more wicked the people get, the crazier the weather gets. So it's not so much that it's a carbon issue in the atmosphere as it is a wickedness issue in the people that's causing the warming. Interesting point. You can go back in our book of Genesis and look at some of that when we talk about Enoch a little bit more back then. In the book of Moses too. But it's going to be a crazy time. It's going to be a crazy time. So if we think of our day and age, we're not there yet. We still got some time to go before it gets this bad. But it might not take long to get there either. So a good warning for us in our day and age. So let's jump over to the next chapter in Joel as we continue forward.